but now he was with the high school. And this is 7th, 8th, and 9th grade. The caliber of music was basically 2-part, maybe a 4-part. Music like You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown, things like that. Nothing of any heaviness. And in 9th grade, for the first time in the history of the Cleveland Heights High School choir, they asked if any 9th graders wanted to audition, because you had to wait till 11th grade to be in this choir. So I auditioned, and blessedly, I was one of a handful that was chosen to be part of the choir. And it was an additional blessing because Mac left after my 11th grade year, so I had these 2 years with him. And what I want to describe is my first summer in preparation for my first year going into 10th grade. There was a park that was called Kane Park, and we had a choral camp for about a week. And the tremendous repertoire that we were going to learn for this term, semester, whatever, we had to learn, we had to memorize. And we had these workshops and sectionals and all. And what is forever etched in my head, I'm so sorry. We were in a gazebo, a wooden gazebo. And all around is nature, and it's open, so there's a breeze, and it's just the most incredible idyllic setting that you could have. And we're in the round, 120 voices. And we were singing O Magnum Mysterium, Vittoria. You don't have to know the piece. All you have to do is know what it sounds like when monks are singing in a monastery. That simple, pure, exquisite tone. Sopranos, altos, tenors, basses, there we were, and this was my first experience with the choir. It was heaven. It was so incredibly beautiful. And Mac opened me up to classical music. I love classical music. We sang Brahms, Liebeslieder waltzes, Mozart Requiem. I mean, on and on. The repertoire was incredible. That was my earliest experience with Mac. And I'll share one other with you. Fast forward to about 10 years ago. You've already heard how Mac had established himself here. And I had moved down here. My mother was on dialysis, and I would go to visit her. And she passed away, my mom of blessed memory. And Mac went on dialysis, and I would go to visit him. And what developed was going from this teacher-student relationship to one of a tremendous friendship. As much as we were both immersed in music and still talked a little about music, we talked about so many other things. Philosophy, religion, we were both deeply religious men. Trials and tribulations that families go through. And I'm the eternal optimist. And I would see that as the time would go on, it would get harder and harder for him to have hope. I don't know how old he was, 78, 79. It was up there. And I said, it's going to happen. And it did. And he was given another 4.5, 5 years to be able to spend time with him and talk and just grow with him, with Emily, my wife as well, Linda. This is the Mac that I also grew to love. Rosa spoke about a steel thread here in life. And in Judaism, we have what's called the neshama, the soul. And everybody has a different take on what life is like, what afterlife is like. And I believe that our souls are with us before we're born, while we are here on earth, and carried over into the afterlife or lives, everlasting life. And everyone that we touch, that neshama, that soul is with us. And that's how I feel about Mac. He's with me wherever I go. We have a Hebrew word, it's shalom. It means hello, it means goodbye, and it also means peace. But when you truly are leaving someone that you love, you don't say shalom, you don't say goodbye. You say lehitraot, which means until we see each other again. So I close by saying to you, Mac, lehitraot.
I was happy to hear what Jim and what Danny had to say about the Cleveland years, and I hope that maybe when I'm finished saying what I want to say, that the people assembled here today will have a fuller and more complete picture of the Mac that we all knew and loved. It's a great honor to be here this morning to share with you my remembrances of Mac from the Cleveland years so long ago. When I heard that Mac had passed away, I thought back to what I was doing on December 14th, 2013. I remember looking out over the water at Mount Vernon, Virginia, where I live, watching the tides ebb and flow, watching the eagles flying by, hearing the wind blowing and seeing the sun shining. And thinking back, I wondered why the forces of nature did not pause for even a moment to recognize the passing of a great force of nature. He surely was one. When I was 10 years old, my father passed away at a very young age. Ironically, he passed away on December 15th, almost exactly 51 years prior to the passing of Mac. Luckily for me, when I was 15 years old, I decided to take on an aspiration that was the most difficult at Cleveland Heights High School. Although I was a good athlete, football player, and our athletic teams at Heights were all very competitive, the highest honor a student at our school could achieve, and this was a school of 3,000 students, the largest public high school in the state of Ohio, was to be accepted as a member of the 110-voice Cleveland Heights High School choir. In order to do so, one had to survive the gauntlet of an audition before Mac, and Jim explained part of the routine. That was just the warm-up. The rest of it was maybe 10 times worse, and I'm guessing that Jim witnessed a lot of that as well. The audition included a cappella singing, sight reading, vocalizing to determine one's vocal range, and a conversation with Mac. He was a bigger-than-life figure, funny, serious, talented, and at the same time frightening. I survived the audition and became one of Mac's tenors, his favorite voice group because he was a talented tenor himself. I was proud to become one of Mac's soloists and a member of the prestigious 24-member Madrigals group. I postponed my athletic career to sing for Mac. In life, everyone has their ups and downs, their successes and failures, triumphs and less than proud moments. As someone who has experienced all of the above, the most difficult accomplishment I ever achieved was passing that audition before Mac. Tougher than a bar exam. Mac was an amazing musician and an even more amazing, inspirational person. Being a member of the choir meant that one learned the meaning and value of public service. The choir and its madrigal group performed concerts at innumerable old age homes, hospitals, and charitable functions. We always participated in the commencement of the holiday season in University Heights, Ohio, by singing a concert under the bell at the May Company store at Cedar Center. I'm sure Danny and Jim remember that very well. Thanks to Mac, we always won the Lake Erie League singing competitions. We weren't necessarily better singers than those who attended other schools in our prestigious league. We became better performers of more difficult scores, thanks to Mac's instruction, intensity, and charisma. It still amazes me to think back over 40 years ago and remember how Mac taught us to sing an A note as a group in perfect pitch on command. If Mac were here in person today, he would give me that look, that frightening look, and ask me why I needed a pitch pipe to find the A note. Under Mac's leadership during my 2 years in the choir, we went on tours of Bermuda and New England. These tours gave us opportunities to become more worldly and to gain access to situations typically inaccessible to high school students. We went to Bermuda on a cruise ship. While there, we performed a concert inside a television broadcast studio. The experience on the ship was truly amazing, a voyage to and from New York City. I gather many of us had never been there before. I remember that when we arrived in New York for the voyage, across the way floated the gargantuan 1,000-foot-long Queen Elizabeth, a monstrous ship on which my mother had emigrated to the United States barely 23 years earlier. During our tour of New England, we visited the Brunswick Air Naval Station in Maine and gave a concert for the military stationed there. We also took tours of the various military aircraft located there. Each year we recorded an album of our best work. Take Me Along in 1969 and A Time for Us in 1970 were masterpiece recordings that hold up to this very day. I remember all of the setup at the Church of the Savior near the high school, the reel-to-reel recording equipment, and all of the microphones. Mac was in his element. He knew all about everything that needed to be done to create a superb recording. We didn't have to record too many takes. He prepared us well. Mac was extremely competitive in all facets of his life. The football team always had a homecoming game. At that game, floats created by the various school activity groups competed to win the prize as the best float. I vividly remember Mac's intensity as we prepared our float my senior year. The girls in the choir created thousands of flowers out of tissue paper, while the boys created the mechanical aspects of the float. I remember pulling several all-nighters as we worked on the float in the garage of the home of a choir member. I recall it was the Colnons, is my recollection. I recall all sorts of welding, hammering, and assembly as we created a float that had a rotating turntable. This reminds me of scenes from the movie Animal House, transforming a Lincoln Continental into a parade float, except without the alcohol, at least on the part of the choir members. Mac was all in, attending every work session and pitching in. I recall Mac's sons, Keith and Kevin, attending many of these work sessions, buzzing around, enjoying themselves, and probably looking with wonder at how their father, then a man in his late 30s, was so inspirational to us. The look on his face when we were awarded the blue ribbon made it all worth the effort. Kirsten was a baby then, I think around a year old. She sure has grown up. Mac taught me that expecting, demanding, and preparing for excellence can make excellence come to pass. Our Christmas concerts at the school auditorium were always sold out, meaning we performed before over 1,000 spectators. Mac would sprint out from the side of the stage in his tux, leap onto the platform, lift his baton, and off we went, providing 3 hours of entertainment for our audience, complete with heavy-duty classical pieces, pop songs, special groups, dancing, costume changes. In essence, a performance unlike any that any other high school could possibly accomplish. Without Mac, these performances would have been devoid of the extras that made them special and memorable. In the words of Mark Twain, they did not know it was impossible, so they did it. As Nelson Mandela once said, it always seems impossible until it's done. Mac enabled us to do the impossible, putting together these programs which were just incredible and so well received in the community. At Mac's insistence, we never performed any concert holding a score. Everything was done by memory, every note, every word, every phrase, every crescendo, every diminuendo. Those of us who were also members of the Madrigal group knew 80 pieces of music from memory, including those performed by the larger choir and others performed just by us. Nothing could be more frightening than Mac conducting a rehearsal and stopping a song to ask you why you were off key or forgot a word or phrase. Conducting 110 voices, he could pick out the individual singers and know what was going on at all times. Nothing could be more rewarding than getting it right and receiving Mac's praise and being a part of something greater than the sum of its pieces. A choir controlled like a well-oiled machine by a master conductor. After Mac left us in Cleveland in 1972 for warmer climes and the opportunity to be on the ground level building a great university, which this most assuredly is, he continued his musical involvement both at FIU and around the country. He spent a lot of his time traveling around the country conducting all-star choirs made up of the best singers in school districts, bringing them together in the space of a week, whipping them into a cohesive choir and performing a concert. I witnessed his efforts on one occasion when he came to Fairfax County, Virginia in the late 1970s to do his thing at Lake Braddock High School. In the space of a few rehearsals, he turned singers from a dozen high schools into a choir that could credibly perform difficult works together. They must have been jealous of those of us who had the privilege to sing for Mac during 3 full school years, sophomore year in music classes, junior and senior years as a member of the choir. Mac and I share a love of boating. I'm sure he would have enjoyed a ride on my fountain cruiser blasting up the Potomac River at 70 miles an hour. I'm sure he had many of those types of experiences out in the Keys and all over the Gulf of Mexico, among other places. I commend those of you attending today to visit Mac's guest book on legacy.com, which I note has been reproduced in the program. Please read all of the comments of people whose lives Mac touched during his lifetime. A better tribute to a human being could not be found. If I were to name the 3 most influential people in my life, besides my parents, Mac is on that list and likely at the top of it. On behalf of those of us who had the privilege to know Mac in Cleveland, to perform for him in the Cleveland Heights High School Choir and in other singing groups, and to be influenced by him and inspired by him to lead lives filled with music, I give my condolences to the McElfresh family and to all who knew him, loved him, and were inspired by him. Godspeed, Mac.
honored guests, FIU faculty, FIU alumni, Mom, Rabbi Bommerstein, thank you, and Mr. Hilton, Mr. Spiegel. My wife Karen, sons Ryan, KC send their condolences and were unable to attend this morning. My dad was born to hardworking people, parents in Pennsylvania. His father, a steel worker, welder, worked crews to weld LSTs during the World War II effort. His mother was a registered nurse. They, like others, survived the Great Depression. They remained very close to us throughout their lives. Cared for and loved, his mother taught Dad how to play piano, and it was there I believe he discovered his talent. Later, his mother taught his grandsons piano on an old player piano in a basement of our home in Ohio. We resisted, she persevered, she won. When I really came to know my dad, he taught high school in Cleveland Heights, had a church choir at Forest Hills, and during a couple of summers, he revitalized a place called Kane Park that we've heard about this morning, an open-air theater for many summer events. My brother and I used to show Marx Brother movies in a small amphitheater around the park and did many other things to support the events. Dad also had a chorus at Bell Telephone that was talked about this morning, and even at that time, we knew him to be composing music and cutting records. But it wasn't all about work, though. We had summers on Lake Erie, took boat trips to the Great Lakes, fished in Canada for walleye and northern pike, and we've been back several times. Learned how to swim the hard way and water ski behind a cabin cruiser that had a 7-foot wake. There were many good and lasting memories because Dad liked being out on the water. His teaching career brought him here when FIU was a landing strip and a flight control tower in 1972 during that vacation. He saw the vision then that is the FIU of tomorrow. Those that were fortunate enough to be in his church choirs knew his passion for the works he selected, knew his intensity for the sound, the purity of the music, and more importantly, where the music came from. His direction and facial expressions that we experienced, the way he would look up as he poured through a score, instilled a belief that he was answering to a higher power. As each of his children grew up, we all served in church choirs, wasn't optional. In one instance, while in high school, my brother and I played a trombone duet one Sunday morning in front of President Nixon at the Key Biscayne Presbyterian Church. The president walked in while we were playing the prelude, and he remained standing until we were finished. It's something you just don't forget. Dad, being Dad, gave us the wink when we finished. Always a teacher, whether in the classroom, the podium, or at home with his family, it was who he was and remains to us today. In very difficult times, I could look to Dad and Mom, and there they would be. How can we help you, son? Why don't we sit down and discuss the problem and look for the answers together? Because they led by example. His compassion for his music never ceased. His compassion for his family was boundless. You know, the rocking chair that Dad received upon retirement from FIU was hardly ever used. He wasn't one to sit still. He eventually wore out his body, but his mind never failed him, and for that I'm grateful. In some religious aspects, there is a belief that his family's legacy is his hereafter. Well, his legacy is in this room. His legacy covers science and technology, the national intelligence community, teaching, music, artisans, global logistics, emergency first responders, information technology, and national defense. And that's just his children and grandchildren. The great-grandchildren have yet to leave their footprint. The sea will grant each man new hope. The sleep brings dreams of home. Christopher Columbus. Dad loved being out on the water. From an old sailor, fair winds, Dad. Keep a fair hand on the helm, steady as she goes. To the honored guests of and alumni of FIU, I say thank you. My father loved it here. To his family, his legacy lives on in each of us. Thank you.